In this video, we will be discussing what ultra-processed foods are, why it's bad for your health, and how to cut it down. So, without wasting further time, let's dive into the video. More than half of the energy an average person in the UK eats and drinks comes from ultra-processed foods. That's perhaps not surprising, as they can be convenient, appealing, and are heavily marketed to us. But researchers have shown that ultra-processed foods can impact our health. What is ultra-processed food? The term ultra-processed foods comes from the NOVA food classification system, which was developed by researchers at the University of São Paulo, Brazil. The system places food into 4 categories, based on how much they have been processed during their production. Number 1. Unprocessed or minimally processed foods. This includes produce such as fruit, vegetables, milk, fish, pulses, eggs, nuts, and seeds that have no added ingredients and have been little altered from their natural state. Number 2. Processed ingredients. This includes foods that are added to other foods rather than eaten by themselves, such as salt, sugar, and oils. Number 3. Processed foods. These are foods that are made by combining foods from groups 1 and 2, which are altered in a way that home cooks could do themselves. They include foods such as jam, pickles, tinned fruit and vegetables, homemade breads and cheeses. Number 4. Ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods typically have 5 or more ingredients. They tend to include many additives and ingredients that are not typically used in home cooking, such as preservatives, emulsifiers, sweeteners, and artificial colors and flavors. These foods generally have a long shelf life. Let's look at the spectrum from natural to ultra-processed foods. Today's foods come in different varieties, ranging from natural to ultra-processed. At one end, we find whole, unprocessed foods in their natural state, such as fruits, vegetables, and grains. As we move along this spectrum, we encounter minimally processed items and basic culinary ingredients. The midpoint consists of moderately processed foods, like freshly made bread or tinned fruits. On the other end lie ultra-processed foods, products with extensive industrial processing and additives, often with little resemblance to their original form. Exploring this spectrum provides insight into the diverse ways in which our food is prepared and the implications for nutrition and health. So, why are ultra-processed foods bad for us? Ultra-processed foods often contain high levels of saturated fat, salt, and sugar, and when we eat them, we leave less room in our diets for more nutritious foods. It's also been suggested that the additives in these foods could be responsible for negative health effects. The actual processing of the food could also make a difference to how our bodies respond to it. Studies have shown, for example, that when foods such as nuts are eaten whole, the body absorbs less of the fat than when the nut is ground down and the oils are released. Another new theory is that diets higher in ultra-processed foods could also affect our gut health. More research is needed to separate these different elements and understand exactly what about ultra-processed foods could be bad for our health. Is it one of these elements, or is it their combination? Currently, it's also hard to know whether it is something within the foods that is the issue, or whether eating a diet high in these foods suggests an overall lifestyle that is linked to poorer health. However, given the high salt, sugar, and saturated fat content of most of these foods, cutting down does seem sensible. The latest research on ultra-processed foods and heart health. Several studies have shown that eating higher amounts of ultra-processed foods is linked to a greater risk of high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, and early death. One study, presented at the European Society of Cardiology Congress in 2023, tracked 10,000 Australian women for 15 years. Those with the highest amounts of ultra-processed food in their diet were 39% more likely to develop high blood pressure than those with the lowest consumption of ultra-processed foods. Another larger analysis, also presented at the meeting, looked at 10 studies involving more than 325,000 men and women. It showed that those who ate the most ultra-processed food were 24% more likely to experience serious heart and circulatory events, including heart attacks, strokes, and angina. Each 10% rise in daily intake of ultra-processed food was linked with a 6% increase in heart disease risk. In addition, a study from 2019, which followed 19000 university graduates in Spain, also showed a connection between ultra-processed foods and risk of early death. Participants were split into groups depending on their level of ultra-processed food intake. The group eating the fewest ultra-processed foods ate less than 2 servings per day, and the group eating the most ate more than 4 servings per day. People in the highest intake group were 62% more likely to have died after an average of 10.4 years than people in the low consumption group. These 3 studies were observational, meaning they can only find associations between factors. They can't prove that ultra-processed foods directly cause negative health outcomes like heart disease. It's possible that other factors could be responsible for the association. In the Spanish and Australian studies, the researchers found the same increased risks after taking into consideration other aspects of people's diets, such as their saturated fat, salt, and sugar intake. This suggests the processing itself may be harmful rather than the higher fat, salt, and sugar levels. Senior dietitian Victoria Taylor at the British Heart Foundation said, "It's important to remember that observational studies like these can only show an association. They cannot tell us what is behind this. The classification of ultra-processed foods used by the researchers is very broad, and so there could be a number of reasons why these foods are being linked to increased risk to our health, for example, nutritional content, additives in food, or other factors in a person's life. Before we consider making any changes to advice or policy, it is important to understand this thoroughly." However, she already recommends that people adopt a Mediterranean-style diet, which includes plenty of minimally or unprocessed foods such as fruit, vegetables, fish, nuts and seeds, beans, lentils, and whole grains. This, along with exercising regularly and not smoking, has been shown to be beneficial for lowering risk of heart and circulatory disease. Despite this, not everyone agrees on the universal harm of all ultra-processed foods. Critics argue that the ultra-processed food category is too broad to be useful as a scientific concept. In their view, the category of ultra-processed food incorporates too many different kinds of food and villainizes too large a range of ingredients, including food additives like preservatives that public health authorities have deemed to be safe. These problems could undermine nutrition research because it's difficult to standardize which foods are included in studies. Another problem is that the concept of ultra-processed food discounts the importance of reformulating food, such as by making it whole grain or lower in sugar, which can help to make processed food healthier. For many people, eliminating processed food just isn't realistic, as it makes up too much of their diet, and they don't have the time or money to cook every meal. Ultra-processed food as a concept is providing a simple, popular answer to what is a very complex question. How can you cut down on ultra-processed foods? Eating a lot of processed foods leaves less room for healthier foods like fruit and vegetables, fish, unsaturated oils, pulses, and nuts and seeds. So if you want to change your diet, try to make some swaps, such as, instead of flavored yogurts with added sugar or sweeteners, choose plain yogurt and add your own chopped fresh, frozen, or dried fruit for sweetness. Instead of buying sauces or ready meals, cook your favorites in larger amounts at home and freeze the extra in portions to use another day. Have porridge in the morning with fruit and nuts instead of sugary low-fiber breakfast cereals. Eat fresh, baked or stewed fruit instead of shop-bought fruit pies or cakes. Have some nuts instead of biscuits with your afternoon cuppa. That's all for today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If so, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to OptiHealth for more captivating health-related content. As always, thanks for joining us on this journey. And until next time, stay cool, stay healthy, and stay curious.